Hello gang, Tattooed Biker here with you, and welcome back to the Unexplained. Tonight I have two shocking, true Bigfoot encounter stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat. First, a grandfather recalls a terrifying incident from his childhood where he and his family were panning for gold when they encountered multiple ape men at Elliott Lake, Ontario. And in our second story, a witness details a summer campout some 45 years ago in central Iowa where two friends had a close encounter with a Bigfoot that was roaming their campsite. So stow your gear, grab your boots, and let's ride to Bigfoot country.
Number 1. Dear Biker, my grandfather, a World War II veteran and born in Scotland, came to Canada with my great-grandparents and lived by Elliott Lake from about 2 years of age until paranormal activity plagued him and his large family. Then, at about 11 years of age, they moved to the Golden Mile region of Ontario and Alliston. He, along with his 4 brothers and his father, used to pan for gold in the various rivers and streams there, near Elliott Lake, and that part in northern Ontario was known to be rich in other precious metals and gems, especially amethyst. That took them to Elliott Lake, in search of other stones, silver and gold, various other times while his family lived there. He recounted to me the first time of many paranormal experiences where he recalled an anomalous or paranormal encounter during a week-long camping, gold-panning excursion with his dad and 2 of his brothers and 1 of his sisters when he was about 9 years old, where they had been cooking fish, caught by his sister over the campfire. He had little memory of any experiences that had preceded this one, although he had overheard much discussion. Anyhow, as they waited to eat his sister's catches, creepy screeching, howling, and then chattering sounds could be heard, almost as if close by, but emanating from somewhere within the forest that surrounded their campsite. He told me that they were sitting around on logs as their father was quite strict, and although the 3 boys were talking loudly, the creepy, unknown sounds quickly reduced the talk to nothing, and his dad, who had picked up his shotgun, had really instilled a deep sense of fear, to which they remained vigilantly silent and continued to listen in earnest. Due to the pending sense of danger that these sounds they had heard, coupled with their father having grabbed the shotgun, they continued to listen in complete silence. The only other sound came from the popping and crackling of the burning wood from the campfire. At first, what they heard was screeching, and the boys thought nothing of it, but later his older sister told him that she had asked their dad what it was. Once silence set in between the boys, it became obvious that this screeching sound didn't sound anything human. The growls and chatter, at first sounding like monkeys, were more guttural and quite frightening. There had been some talk of ape men, as they called them in the area during the 30s, but not many would talk about it openly, for fear of being labeled as delusional or crazy. Yet, in whispers to one another, the boys speculated that these sounds were coming from an ape man. Then, after being hushed up again by their father, it sounded like the chatter was coming from 2 or more unknown creatures, and within a short time these sounds got closer to them. What truly frightened them was that the screeches or screams, as if an unknown creature was injured or in pain or trouble, and the theory later on was that this creature was calling for the help of one of its kind. The sounds came closer and closer, and the screeching slowly began to subside, and the chatter between these 2 or more creatures grew. Quietly but quickly, my grandfather's dad, after instructions to my great-aunt to go and hide, and the boys, they snuffed out the fire, buried the fish, and grabbing only necessary items to carry on their backs, abandoned camp, grabbing Grandpa's sister and hastily scrambled away from the approaching sounds. One of my brother's strings on his pack broke, and important tools were in his bag, so two of the brothers stopped to save what they could and placed them in the other brother's bag. My grandpa and his sisters were in front of their father, who was in the middle and guarding the boys as they saved his gear. The two boys were, of course, behind him and somewhat still exposed to the opening of the trees and most near the lakefront where their now abandoned camp had stood. Suddenly, my great-grandfather yelled out, "Leave the gear and run," amongst other things that Grandpa said that he wouldn't repeat. My great-aunt screamed with distracted the two boys, who in turn, a fear-inducing howl, unlike anything any of them had ever heard before, came very loudly, very close. My great-grandfather yelled, "There's 4 or 5 of them, and God help us." My grandfather said that the two brothers left everything, and the group just ran, while their father fired shots at one of them. Because 2 ape men retreated, one was carrying a smaller one, but one was running at them, growling and shrieking aggressively. Fortunately, all 5 family members were unharmed and able to escape. To where, I don't think Grandpa ever said. They only ever discussed this encounter amongst themselves but a few times until many years had passed by. By the time my great-uncle George had brought it up with my grandpa and my great-uncle Gord, they'd all been married and started families of their own, scattering about different areas of Ontario. Grandpa believes it was 1949, before my mom and 2 of her older sisters were born, that he and Grandma had only 2 of their 5 children, but at the time what prompted the discussion was a Bigfoot sasquatch story in Dawson's Creek, British Columbia, where my grandparents were about to move. From around the time of this Bigfoot sighting, around the 30s to the late 40s, many stories had been appearing in a lot of the newspapers, especially post-World War II. My grandfather became a closet Sasquatch researcher, amongst other areas of paranormal research, and he collected any article that he'd come across over those nearly 2 decades. Afterward, this open discussion about the experience that the brothers had. Grandpa shared the research with George and Gord, and Sasquatch had a name here in Canada. Throughout Grandpa's lifetime preceding his childhood experiences on Elliott Lake, after this discussion in 1949, Grandpa began to write stories for the newspapers in both Ontario and British Columbia publications, most notably the Toronto Star. This wasn't his only paranormal experience, but it was one in which there was other witnesses. Grandpa had numerous paranormal experiences throughout his life, and Elliott Lake was the place where some of the more frightening but accepted experiences took place. He and his brother Gord saw UFOs there, but other anomalous creatures and entities were seen by him and others that he knew as a child. I believe that everything Grandpa ever shared with the people who read his newspaper stories was true. He didn't always mention that these stories were based on, if not 100% real-life true accounts, but he was well read. Unfortunately, back in the 50s and 60s, a published story only paid an average of about $200. His highest-paid story published was in 1973, for which he was paid about $1,000, but it wasn't a paranormal story. It was a comedy called Mother Drives, a non-fiction account of him trying to teach Grandma, a 4'11" Scotswoman, how to drive a huge Cadillac boat, as she called it. In short, I have no idea where these Bigfoot cryptids come from, be it underground in caves or possibly interdimensional, but I too think that they're real. Also, there is some kind of tie-in with UFOs, and Elliott Lake is a popular destination for Bigfoot and Sasquatch hunters even to this day. His other paranormal experiences and publications are fascinating too. I've kept every original manuscript or writing that he's ever written, whether published or not, and one day, in honor of him and his unpublished work especially, I plan to put together a book full of his stories. Thanks, Biker, for reading this, and have a great weekend. God bless you, your family, and friends. Signed, Ken. Number 2. Dear Tattooed Biker, thanks in advance for reading my email. I grew up in the country, in central Iowa, Marshall County to be exact, and where we lived, the houses were literally a mile apart. It was mostly farmland with large wooded areas in between. One particular summer, a schoolmate friend and I went camping at a local reservoir. I think we were maybe only 12 or 13 years old. Pre-high school, anyway. Now, this was back in the 70s, so I don't remember exactly, but what I do remember was that the campground that we stayed at was very isolated and around this huge reservoir. But there were park rangers around, so we never felt like the area was unsafe. But the very first night, around 2 in the morning, we heard someone walking around outside. We were both terrified because it was big, not like a raccoon or a possum. We were both frozen with fear. After about 10 minutes of not hearing anything, and assuming that whatever it was had already left, my friend got his flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent. He did this as quietly as humanly possible. When he turned on his flashlight, standing there was what we could only describe as a Bigfoot, just about 30 feet away from us, staring directly at us. It slowly backed up and walked away. We never heard anything else walking around that night after it left. We were so terrified and had no car, and they didn't have cell phones back then, so we just had to endure the rest of the night. When our parents finally picked us up the next day, we were so glad to get the heck out of there. And back then, we didn't know anything about Bigfoot. It wasn't even something that was talked about, at least not where we were. So at the time, we had no idea what we were looking at. Thanks for reading. Signed, Eric. And there you have it. 2 true Bigfoot sighting stories submitted by viewers just like you. I'm anxious to hear your thoughts about these in the comments below, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have an encounter or an unexplained experience that you want to share, please, just send it to the email address in the description and your story may just wind up in a future episode. Anyways, thanks for riding with me tonight. I really appreciate it. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.